Hello, everybody. It's very nice to have you here, especially the day is so nice too. So just it's a little report. And hello, who are following us online now. So today our laser talk Brussels, and the subject is resonant realities, investigating the nexus of sound, space, and neuroscience. We are host today in IMAL. So this is a center of experimental art and science. And we will now. I would like to introduce you first our speakers. So I start from the right, so just this is Axel Cleeremans. He is a professor of cognitive science at the WALLONIE-BRUXELLES, and he is leading researcher in consciousness study. His work focuses on how the brain processes sensory stimuli, particularly sound, and mechanism underlying implicit learning and neutral plasticity. Sorry. Giulia Vismara, she is electroacoustic composer and researcher, specializing in specialized sound and immersive audio environments. Her work explores the interplay between sound, perception, and memory, focusing on how spatial audio influences cognitive and emotional responses. Brona Martin, she is electroacoustic composer too and sound artist, whose work focuses on immersive soundscape and their emotional and social impact. Using field recordings and electroacoustic techniques, she creates compositions that explore themes of place, identity, and community. And our moderator, Peter Fries, he is an artist, and also he has a background in self-organizing social systems and PhD and space technology. Besides his activity in ICT innovation, he is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher with an interest in humanity between present and future. So I would like to give the floor now to Brona, and she will start our lazy talk.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My brief talk is a composer's journey through soundscapes. As was said, I'm a composer and a sound artist, a lecturer in music and sound at the University of Greenwich in London. And I work with different technologies to create immersive soundscape experiences. I work with field recordings, spoken word, instruments and synthesizers are all my sound sources that I use in my work. And then I compose fixed media works that are then projected through loudspeakers, which is what electroacoustic composition is for anyone who's interested. Just so you know that within this area of soundscape composition, it's a subgenre of electroacoustic music. But what separates it, what identifies it, is that the sounds that we use within our pieces are recognizable sounds. So if you have rainfall, for example, you wouldn't process it so it becomes abstract. You would know it was rain. That's kind of a simple example. The works that we create are designed to evoke the listener's associations and memories and imagination. And it's also, we create these works to foster soundscape awareness, which is really important, especially now with climate change. Some of the themes within my work and within soundscape composition is about raising awareness of the world's soundscapes, the impact of noise pollution on natural habitats and also on humans, on ourselves, how soundscapes change over time due to economic and industrial development. We create pieces that explore the relationship between people and place. We also can think about domestic soundscapes, the soundscapes of our homes and in environments that we occupy daily. And sound and memory is also a part of these pieces. So for this talk, I'm just going to mention some of the ways that I compose 3D soundscapes. And why do we like 3D so much? Well, a lot of this might be quite obvious, but when we work in 3D spatial audio, we can create more realistic soundscapes, because obviously when we're outside in the environment, we are listening in 3D, and we are able to draw the attention of the listener to all of the different layers. So I feel when I'm working in 3D spatial audio, I can spread the layers of the soundscape vertically and really immerse the listener in that space. And we can envelop them within this sound world. So then 3D spatial audio, I'm just going to mention ambisonics, which is a spatial audio format. Most people are familiar with Dolby Atmos if you've been to the cinema, and that has increased in size from 5.1, 7.1 to all different loudspeaker configurations. With ambisonics, this is just a helpful definition. The basic approach of ambisonics is to treat an audio scene as a full 360-degree sphere of sound coming from different directions around a center point. The center point is where the microphone is placed while recording, or where the listener's sweet spot is located while playing back. So when you're in the cinema and you're listening to Dolby Atmos, you have the speakers in the front and the rear and the sides and the ceiling. And with ambisonics, we're thinking of it in terms of a sphere of sound. So that's briefly what the difference is. So this is a very nice studio that I work in at the University of Greenwich. It's a 32.4 loudspeaker setup. So the 32 are the speakers that you can see, and the 4 are 4 subwoofers, which are in the corners, and they are for low frequency sound. And yeah, I really love working in this space. It allows us to record and play back 3D audio in the sphere. We can extend our soundscapes beyond the horizontal plane to include sounds above and sounds below. And when we work in ambisonics, it's actually really nice because it's like we put the sounds into a sphere, but then we have the technology where if I came to IMAL or some other space that doesn't have all of these speakers, I can still decode my piece for other types of speaker arrays. Yeah, and just what I said there about 2D, when I started working in surround sound, I was working in 5.1 and in 8 channel, which is really nice. So you would have 5.1 or a ring of 8 loudspeakers around you, which can create a really nice immersive experience, but you just don't have the height or the depth as you do with ambisonics. Yeah, this technology, we can create more realistic interpretations of soundscapes, and I can think about the layers of the soundscapes and really spread them around the sphere. I can put high frequency content like birds, for example, or crickets up in the top loudspeakers, and maybe put lower frequency content in the lower speakers. So we can spatialize the spectrum of sound from high to low frequency across the loudspeaker. Yeah, and just in terms of, I've just showed you a very fancy studio, but now I'm going to say that these new technologies are accessible. The software that I use is very affordable. The Reaper is a digital audio workstation, so like Pro Tools, Ableton Live. It's quite cheap, it's $60, and you can evaluate it if you want for free. And the plugins that we use to work with ambisonics are also free. Some of them are free. So just if anyone's interested, this is a good starting point if anyone wants to get into ambisonics and spatial audio. And this is just an example of the workflow. So in this piece called Frogland, I actually work with not surround sound recordings, but mono and stereo recordings. And then I'm placing them in a sphere of sound, in the ambisonic sphere, using this stereo encoder. So that places the sound in the sphere, and I can pan it around the sphere. And then we have this decoder, which is this guy here. And in this situation, I'm making a spatial audio piece, but I had access to an array of 16 loudspeakers, with 8 on the top and 8 on the bottom. And all of this information here is the loudspeaker positions in terms of elevation and azimuth. So they're placed in the actual space. So I can create a decoder. I can decode my ambisonic sound field onto this array of loudspeakers. So that's just to show you what the workflow might look like. I just love this. This is my piece. I'll play an excerpt after I finish talking. But you can see when I say like spreading the spectrum of the sound across the array, you can see here, this is all low. So this is a stereo file. It's 2 channels. This is all low frequency content. And then we go higher, and there's some spaces. I think that's a lot of crickets up there. And we have water sounds coming in here. And then obviously you can see that there's going to be a big gesture there at some point. So yes, and then also exploring spatial audio and game engines, which again is thinking about, well, how can I bring my work outside of concert hall environments and outside of academic institutions that are usually the places that can afford these loudspeakers. And I found that VR working with game audio was quite a nice way to bring, you can bring a VR headset kind of anywhere and share your work in another format. So yeah, I started working with Ambisonics and Unity Game Engine, and I've created audiovisual works and VR experiences using this technology. And again, it's about bringing your work to new audiences and introducing them to these soundscape pieces, which I think are really good to listen to in terms of calming, and which we'll talk about in more detail. Sorry, I didn't realize it would be bright in here. My images are quite dark. That's just a still from the game. It's just a natural environment that I built in Unity, and you can walk through it on the VR experience and have spatial audio all around you. So I'm just going to come out of this presentation and I'll play you some. Let's start with this. So this is the game audio experience. So that's the AV version, but there's also, when I would play this in a performance, it would be surround sound, and also the VR experience. You can actually walk through this landscape, which is quite cool. Yeah, so that's, I think I'll stop there because I'm running out of time. I'm out of time.
You would have something else?
Yeah, I have one more. Well, like,
Let's
it's
go.
short.
Let's go.
Okay.
Go.
Yeah, so that's a stereo. Obviously, these are stereo excerpts, but usually they would be in 360. So it's quite nice if you're in the middle and all those sounds are around you. That's me. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brona. So our second speaker is Axel Cleeremans, Professor of Cognitive Science at University Libre de Bruxelles.
Okay, thanks. So this is going to be completely different. I'm not a specialist in auditory cognition, as it's called, but I'm interested in consciousness. And to give you an introduction to that, that is me in the Black Rock Desert. And I was there to film a documentary about science called The Most Unknown, which you could see on Netflix for a long while. Now, you can still see it on YouTube if you hunt for it. But I wanted to show you this amazing picture of me in this desert because I was having all these visual sensations, this amazing distance. I was having all these tactile sensations. The playa sand is very special. This desert, by the way, is where Burning Man is organized every year. And I was told I was too old to go there, so I didn't. But so vision, touch, and also sound, and paradoxically here, the absence of sound. There was a sort of heavy silence in this gigantic desert, which I found very interesting. And so I had all these sensations, all these emotions too. It was a long trip from here to get there. I was very tired and excited about what we were going to do in this desert, and all those thoughts about what the movie would actually be like, and so on and so forth. And all of these combined in your mind to define your presence to the world at some point in time. And that is what we call consciousness. And we know that everything that goes on in your mind is produced by the biological activity of your brain. And we know that the brain is this incredibly complicated object, consisting in humans of about 86 billion neurons, each connected to about 10,000 other neurons, and this is only half of the story, because there's also other cells, astrocytes, that are even more numerous. And so this is amazingly complex. And we know that it's a biological activity of the brain that produces everything that goes through your mind, including the perception of those beautiful soundscapes that we heard about. And the big question is, well, how does it work? How does the biological activity of the brain produces all your mental states? And because nobody has an answer to this question, this is taken to be one of the big scientific mysteries for the 21st century, along with other big questions without answers: the origin of life, the origin of the universe, why we have this American president, etc., etc. And so, what is consciousness? We can turn to philosophers. Here you have John Searle, who says consciousness consists of those states of sensation, of feeling, or awareness, which begin in the morning when we awake from a dreamless sleep and continue throughout the day until we fall into a coma, or fall asleep again, or otherwise become unconscious. And so you say, well, this is not much of a definition, but it captures the fact that experience is everything that happens in your mind when you have a perception, such as this patch of red. It is what it feels like. Now, what does it feel like for you to see red? Well, this is highly personal. It depends on your memories, and it depends on your previous interactions with the color red, or with the sound of the ocean, or with any sort of sensation. And all those memories are linked together in you in a way that is not exactly identical with the way it's linked in me, to define what it feels like for you to see red. And all those memories are also associated with a valence, an emotional valence. It felt good to play with fire trucks. It felt horrible to see the blood of the victim of a zombie in a zombie movie. And the same goes for sound, of course. Music's evocative power is deeply effective. And I was struck when we were listening to your soundscapes about how much of the visual sort of experience it also brings about. So we're truly building representations there. Now, what is consciousness? I tried to convey to you what we're interested in, but the truth is nobody knows what consciousness is. Nobody has a good theory at this point. Nobody knows what it feels like to be a bat. That's the title of the paper that the American philosopher Thomas Nagel gave to an article he published in 1974, and he said, we could know everything there is to know about the nervous system of a bat. We would still not know what it feels like for the bat to chase insects at dusk with a sensory system that sonar will later inspire itself from, and that sensory system is based on sound, basically, because, as you know, bats use echolocation. They emit ultrasounds, and then they measure the echo produced by surfaces with which the sound interacts. This is amazing, and it's very hard to figure out what it feels like. In a way, that's what you're trying to do. But what it would feel like to have a sense of space conveyed exclusively by sound. And of course, this is a little bit what blind humans, people, experience. And in fact, my good friend Melvin Goodale, who's a Canadian neuropsychologist, showed that some blind people use echolocation to navigate space. So they actually click and analyze automatically the echo. And now there's a device that blind people can wear that emits clicks automatically. So this is fascinating. I think that we find echolocation in humans. So it's for all these reasons that the philosopher David Chalmers described consciousness as the hard problem for the cognitive neurosciences. The hard problem is, he makes it a special problem. Perceiving sound, perceiving vision, figuring out how we make decisions, those are all complicated problems, but for him it's easy problems. Consciousness is the hard problem because nobody has a good answer to it. And it's even more salient now that people are talking about conscious artificial intelligence. So there's a sense in which one can talk about synthetic phenomenology. Can a machine feel anything? We're far from We're far from there, but it's something that people are thinking about. Just one word about theories of consciousness. Of course, everybody has a theory of consciousness. There's about 80 different theories of consciousness. Some people think that the world is conscious, that everything in the universe is conscious. Some other people think it's just humans. So there's a wide range of philosophical positions that I will not go over. There's 4 big theories. I'm just showing you the slide. I won't go through them, but you can see that they all assume different regions of the brain as being involved in making the difference between what we can do with and without consciousness. How do we build a science of consciousness? That's part of something I'm trying to do. The main problem is that we don't have a way of measuring your conscious states. I have to ask you. I don't know what's going on in your mind. Maybe you're anticipating the next talk already and wondering when I'll stop. Maybe you're following what I say. I don't know. I have to ask you. Of course, we have imaging machines that make it easier because then we can correlate what I see is happening in your brain with what you're telling me. And so in this way, hope to develop a contrast between what happens when you see something and what happens when you don't. Or what happens in binocular rivalry, which is a situation where you can see one thing in 2 different ways. So for instance, this picture shows a face and a house in the same slide. The house is green, the face is red, or the opposite. And you're wearing those 3D glasses. And so I can ask you, and what happens is that because your brain cannot integrate the house with the face, it alternates between seeing the face, seeing the house. And I can ask you to indicate what you see at some point. And if I ask you to do that while you're in a scanner, I can also look at what changes in your brain when you see the house and when you see the face. And when you do that, you find a face-specific region of the brain that lights up when people say, I'm seeing the face, and a house-specific region of the brain that lights up when people say, I see the house. We still don't know why the experience comes about, so we don't understand the mechanism of consciousness, but we can get an idea of what regions of the brain are involved by doing these kinds of experiments. So consciousness plays all sorts of tricks with us. This is a stimulus in which you should see movement. There's no movement in the stimulus. You can print this on a piece of paper. So it's an illusion of movement. This is perhaps one of the most beautiful, strongest illusions ever. A and B are the same shade of gray. It's almost impossible to believe, but they are, as you can see. If I mask everything, you see that they're the same shade of gray. Why do we see them so differently? Well, because we know that these kinds of boards are made up of squares of alternating light and dark colors. So that's a high level thought about it. And then B is in the shade of the cylinder, and the visual system automatically compensates for low light. That's why you see a white sheet of paper to always be white, regardless of the fact that you're at noon in the sun or at midnight in your office. There's something going on similar, in a similar way with auditory stimulations.
Ba, 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 ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, 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 la, ba, ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed.
It's the same sound, but you see it, you perceive it completely differently as a function of what you see from vision. Subliminal perception is another good example. Here is a study. There's a word behind this mask. You can't see it because it's too close to the mask, so you just see the mask in principle. You do imaging on this, so you look at what's going on in the brain, and a word-specific region of the brain lights up. Not so much, but it shows that the word is processed by your brain, even though you don't see it. Now you can do exactly the same, but with a little bit more of time between the word and the mask. Now you see the word, you can do imaging. When you see the same word-specific region lights up, but there's also a whole bunch of other regions that light up And this is taken by some theorists as reflecting conscious processing. You can do the same thing with sound, and there's been very interesting experiments about the cerebral basis of subliminal speech writing. You can embed a word in sound. Another example of how consciousness is fooling us. Have you seen this video? No. Then we'll play it again. It takes a little bit, but you have to count the number of times that the white players pass the ball. There's 6 people, 3 are dressed in black, 3 are dressed in white. There's 2 basketballs that are passing to each other. You have to count the number of times that the white players pass the ball. So if you're ready, here we go. You're not counting. All right, how much?
16, 18.
Yeah, I think it's 18. Who saw the gorilla?
Yeah, I saw it.
Who didn't see the gorilla? Some people didn't see the gorilla. Okay, you didn't do the task right. There's a gorilla coming in from the right of the screen, stopping in the middle of your visual field and exiting. Of course, it's not a real gorilla. It's a man dressed in a gorilla suit. And now you see it, of course. How could you have missed that? You know. So we think we see everything, but in fact, we're not really seeing everything. And this is a phenomenon that involves attention. And here's another one in the auditory domain. It's the cocktail party effect, where
all right, so you know, today we're going to talk about more than talking. These are the 4 critical things.
you know, cocktail,
The first
everybody's
is
speaking at the same time,
on this very
but you can focus on
this
one
today is
stream.
the third thing.
And probably here you can do it too if you pay attention. You can focus on one stream of speech.
So what are the things that make it really great? Because that way I can eat.
So understanding that is also a big part of what we do in cognitive neuroscience. So how does attention make it possible to segregate streams of audio? And of course, in the sort of soundscapes that we hear about now today, this is a major aspect of designing those soundscapes, I presume, is figuring out how people will interpret the scene. What will they group together? What will they separate from each other? There's a whole field called auditory scene analysis, and this is the book that launched it, which tends to, or tries to explain how we do these things, how we direct attention to sounds, what goes together. It's the principles of Gestalt psychology and vision, but it also applies to sound. There's also the super interesting effects. Now, before you thought, oh, this gorilla thing is just about attention, here is another change blindness demonstration in which you know that there's a change. I'm asking you to find it. There's nothing that distracts you. So let's see if you can find it. This is not a picture, it's a video. So something is changing in the picture. If you see it, you can just raise your hand. And of course, we're not going to spend the whole evening watching this, so I'll just tell you, it's the entire face of the central actor that goes from having a really smiling expression. He just had that, and now it's going back. If you look at the mouth, you can see it. You can show this 40 times to people. They still see nothing. Another illusion, there's 12 dots in this picture, but you can only see 3 or 4 at the same time. It's a complicated mechanism. And so all of this made my friend Anil Seth claim that we're in fact hallucinating all the time. And what we call reality is just the intersection of all different hallucinations. So we see things that are not there. We fail to see things that are there, like the smile. We fail to see everything, but we think we do. And we see differences where there are none. So here's a guy who says, reality does not exist. It's actually just a construction from our brain. He has a book called The Case Against Reality. I think this is going a little bit too far, but it's an interesting perspective. And it highlights one of the messages I wanted to leave you with, which is that consciousness really is a construction between what we think is the case and what is actually the case. And I will close with a soundscape of my own, which I shot 2 days ago in Saint-Genès, where there's a, I don't know if it's going to work, where there's a pond and there were thousands of frogs celebrating love in that pond. And it was just incredible. They're all making love in that pond. I understand. There you go. That's my team. Thank you very much.
I'm Giulia Vismara, and I am a sound artist and an electroacoustic composer. And my main focus of research is the relationship between sound and space. So I studied electroacoustic composition, and I have a PhD in sound design, especially about the relationship between space and 3D audio technologies. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how I work, so how I decline my research into this relationship. So how I'm exploring the interplay between sound and space, and how sound can alter and modify the perception of a given space, of an architecture, but at the same time also how sound can recreate the architectural and spatial dimension. So this is a composition, a fifth order ambisonic, which arrays from a dialogue with an astrophysician, and it was about how the interstellar dust was created, and how interstellar dust is interacting with the cosmic space, with the interstellar space. From this dialogue, I discovered that it's a cycle of life and death, and interstellar dust is what is born, let's say like this, from the explosion of stars and planets, but at the same time is going to recreate new stars and planets. And so I focus myself on 3 specific type of sounds, and I use them to create an immersive environment with 47 speakers in the dome of the ZKM, which is a center for media and sound in Germany. And I was kind of trying to give to the audience the possibility of inhabit this space, and also this composition is totally invented, in the sense that I was really imagining how this grain were going to react, and how this grain, according to their weight and their mass, were going to move into the space. We are going to listen to it after, no, maybe now. Mm-hmm. So I like to improvise. So I'm going to stop it here. So this was entirely fictional. So it was my imagination regarding the behavior in the space of the interstellar dust and how the particles were reacting and creating new particles, bigger agglomerate and planets in the end. The research that I'm doing now, it's a research for 2 years, and it's with FRART. It's an artistic research, and it was founded by WALLONIE. It's about this idea of trying to find spatial archetypes, and with that I mean shape and patterns that can illustrate how the spaces are structured and experienced, and also how they are influenced both by psychological and cultural factors. And with that, I would like, through sound, to recreate some specific shapes and recreate the sensation of these spatial archetypes. And I've just started the research, but there is one project that I've done 2 years ago that it was like a kind of a prototype in a way, where I was already experimenting with a specific shape. And you can see here there is this it's a dark black and white photo with little dots of light and this huge linear, it's like a cable, I don't know to define, like a tunnel, which is going up, where there is this sense of ascension. And I used this photo, which was found in an archive in Athens, created by Yannis Xenakis, a Romanian Greek composer, where I was really, through the use of sound, giving the idea of going through the darkness, but at the end arriving into having some glimpse of lights, and passing through this shape. So we can listen a little bit of this too. was using this photo as a score, and I was using also some sound illusion or psychoacoustic effect, also with this glissandi, which was keep on going until the end, which is keep on going until the end of the composition, basically, to give this sense of very long structure, like a tunnel where you are going into, and then when you are out of the tunnel, there are some glints of light. We didn't arrive there, but yeah, there are at the end. Yeah, another example of another work installation that I've done actually at the University of Greenwich, where Brona is working, where I was using a particular type of speaker, which is called ECO. So it's a compact 3D speaker that works through an array of 20 speakers. So in that sense, the experience of 3D, it's reverse. If you compare it with an ambisonic dome, where you have all the speakers around you, in this case you have a physical object which can be used also with some walls behind it, or around it, but which can really work with the architecture, with the resonances of the space. So it's really interesting because it can be used for specific in situ sound installations, and the perception of sound, it's like really that you have some 3D sound object which are moving around you. And after the experience of ambisonics in a dome, and also wave field synthesis, which is a circle of speakers which are working through proximity, let's say like this. For me, it was like an amazing discovery, the use of ECO. And for this project in particular, I can show you. Okay, that's it. So ECO, it's the speaker. I cannot touch the screen because I'm having too many things to carry. Sorry. So this is ECO. So it's projecting the sounds. It's diffusing very specific beams of sound externally. So I was placing the ECO in a crypt to create this 40 minutes audiovisual installation. And I was using the impulse responses of other architecture, which were part of the same complex of building at the University of Greenwich, as a compositional tool, in the sense that I was using the, let's say, acoustical fingerprint of other architectures to change the perception of the crypt. So of course the crypt was having a very low ceiling and the sound was kind of muffled. And I was using a choir, so a very medium, high pitch frequencies to create it's a sensation of uplifting while experiencing the installation. And I was using the ECO, which was not functioning perfectly in that space. So I was also diffusing the sound through a quad, so other 4 speakers, and I was alternating. So the ECO was in the middle of the crypt in a specific point, and then the 4 speakers were much more in a lower position in the angles. And at the same time, I was working with a visual artist who was mapping some part of the crypt. And he was using scan images of other architectures, which another research group, which is part of the University of Greenwich and is called Captivate, has created. So this is a very short video of the mapping of the column. and the sound. Here it was. So here really the idea was to transform this given architecture in something else, or trying through the sound to really modify also the perception of the dimension of that space. And then just would like to talk about briefly, I don't know if I have time. Okay. So at the moment I'm working on a composition for 90 speakers and conductive Bones headphones. And it's a composition which will be performed in Montreal. And it's about water. And it's about Venice, because I was born in Venice. And so I'm using, again, this idea of the acoustic fingerprints of specific churches in Venice. And I was able to go there and to record the impulse response with a 3D microphone using a balloon. We were not using a sweep, but just doing guerrilla impulse responses. So you can... Just basically through the explosion of the balloon, we were able to capture the reverberation of the space. So then I can use this reverberation for composing and adding this reverberation to sound that I'm going to use for my piece. And just short preview. It's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much to all the speakers and the presentations. I would have a question. because you try to recreate much more complex soundscapes, both through technology but also through the conceptual approach. And I was wondering, Alex, from a cognitive science perspective, excellent. I will learn it at the end of the what's going to happen if we have all of a sudden this much more complex soundscapes compared to normally we have stereo, we have just noise. So what's happening if we have this complex soundscapes?
Well, I think I'm discovering this. It's incredibly immersive. I think it's the equivalent of visual VR in a way for the auditory system, because it produces a sense of presence that is impossible to achieve even with very good stereo systems, I guess, even though I was very much impressed by how much of the complexity and immersive character you can still get out of just two speakers as you have here. And so this is, I think, also a testimony to the skills that you have designing or exploiting the features of the auditory system to make it to make those sounds seem so present, basically. I don't know much about the auditory system, but the basic of it is that we localize sounds by analyzing the difference between the time that a sound gets to your left ear and the time it gets to your right ear. And the brain is incredibly sensitive to these very small temporal differences. And that's the basis for localizing sounds in space. And so if you can fine-tune your audio in a way that exploits this feature of the auditory system, then you can project this convincing image of objects in space.
And question to both you, Brona, and Giulia. I think if you compose, you're not always thinking about consciousness or cognitive science even, right? But how do you approach this idea that listeners develop, or it's more inherent, how they develop this complex feeling or recreation, representation of what you intended to do through multi-layered approach, very complex sound system? How do you approach the thing or the aspect of consciousness?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because my perception of my music is very different to what the audience experiences, which is really wonderful. But yeah, they will have a different relationship, and my relationship with my music is we have a very strong relationship with the sounds, because I've recorded them myself, and when I listen back to them, I know exactly where I was, maybe what I was wearing, what kind of mood I was in. You bond with the sounds because you were there from the very beginning. You were there even before you began to record. You were listening to the environment. You were tuning into it, and, you know, kind of like a meditation, you're sitting there and you're trying to listen to all of the layers. You have to start with listening, and then you record. And then selfishly, like, these pieces I make, they're for myself first, because they're sounds that I like, and they are atmospheres that, you know, I like sitting in the middle of that piece, that Frogland it's called, which is funny because you played frogs as well. And the part that I played, you couldn't hear the frogs. I should have played anyway. But yeah, so
I didn't design my frogs. It was just, it was just your experience being there, listening to nature.
So yeah, I kind of just release the composition into the world and hope people will like it. But I have no way of everyone's experience is so different, because it will trigger memory and it will take them on a journey, and it's extremely visual. That's what electroacoustic music is about. It's about sound. There's no visuals, because it is very visual and it will take you on a journey. And with the soundscapes, you'll know, oh, that's a natural environment somewhere. I think. But I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Me, I have a different relationship, I think, with my compositions, in the sense that, we were discussing this yesterday, but that I have the necessity to create a form every time, so I have a very clear focus and something that I want to accomplish with my composition, and I like also to think in terms of what I'm going to trigger the audience, how I'm going to trigger the audience, and what I'm going to trigger in the audience. And so for that reason, I use specific psychoacoustic effect or specific frequencies. Then, of course, I don't know what's going to happen, but I put an intention there. And this, it's helping me to give a shape also to the composition. And it's very difficult, but I would like the composition to be completely detached from myself. So to be, to give shape to a concept or to an experience, not really related it to my experience, which is impossible, but I tend to that. But I don't know if I succeeded.
Okay, yeah, thank you. What I felt tonight is also your recording is there's a strong physical presence, and it's very warm. It's very present. It's very pleasant. It's also recomforting, right? Mm. At the same time, you were also talking about we're entering a virtual world. We're entering an era where we have artificial intelligence, artificial consciousness and unconsciousness. So even if you don't know what consciousness is today, absolutely. And you mentioned before that there's a lot of discussion also, that's contradictory positions. Now we're opening up another field, right? So the virtual space, virtual sound spaces, and of course, other forms of consciousness or other forms of a more intelligent feedback, understanding, interaction. How do you see this? Is it for you frightening? Is it interesting avenues to come, also for new creations, challenging you, or just also saying, I'm less interested? How do you see this new fields, the virtual worlds and the artificial consciousness? I think all of you.
Well, I talked about artificial consciousness, but I want to emphasize that no AI system today is conscious. And I'm really not sure we want to go there, because if we do, we'll be all of a sudden faced with artificial intelligent systems whose intelligence will, in some ways, and perhaps more than we know, be much more intelligent than a human being. They already are in some specific domains, but if they now also have intentions, and if they can be infinitely duplicated, that makes them basically immortal. I think there's a real existential risk. So that's what I had to say about artificial consciousness. I think the question was a little bit about how you see AI in doing what you do, or is that a threat, or is that...
And the virtual spaces as well.
You can talk about virtual spaces. Yeah. Oh, okay. I won't jump. I won't talk about AI because, yeah. But the virtual spaces, I think, like accessibility. If you think about that, I don't know if many people have done a VR experience, but they can be quite amazing. And there are a lot of people. They're used in health. You know, there are a lot of people in the world who are bedbound. You know, they're ill, they're sick, they're in hospital.
What is VR?
Oh, VR, virtual reality. Sorry, yeah. So when you put on so yeah, because that was what I was thinking when we were all in COVID during lockdowns, that was one of the things I was thinking about, this VR experience, creating this place that I could go to. Because I remember the first VR experience I had was a David Attenborough experience, and it was about how the beginning of human life, and we were in the sea and everything was just moving around. I was in the middle of this ocean and it was really overwhelming. It was so beautiful. So, I mean, VR is used for simulations. People, you know, in health, people learn how to use laboratories. You know, they put on gloves and they will work in a laboratory with the goggles. They learn how to use some facilities. So I think VR is quite useful, especially giving people a new place to visit, especially if they can't access certain places. And it can be good. Like my VR, it was all about just going for a walk and exploring. And anyone that used it was felt really calm, and they just liked, it's not a game, it's not a computer game experience. There's no goal. You just walk around and listen, and yeah. So that's what I was thinking when I made it, yeah.
For me, yeah, it's a little bit threatening for sure. But at the same time, I'm curious also to explore the possibilities of, for example, imagining spaces that we don't know that they exist or that we are not capable to imagine them. So what I want to say, to see it as an open possibility to explore something that we never thought about. That it's fascinating for me. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were mentioning David Chalmers, who said each reality, even the virtual reality, is a reality. So, and that goes maybe in the way to say this could be explored. I think all of you have a positive and inclusive approach to sound and consciousness, right? It's the experience, it's inclusivity, the ethical hesitations, considerations. So, how in a positive way could we bring out more of your work of soundscapes for helping people, giving orientation to people who have disabilities, but maybe also exploring other worlds which would often don't have no access, right? So how could you envision, if you cross these fields, consciousness, sound design, and then also inclusive society, health, ethical perspective, how would you envision future works, or how this could be developed?
Well, I can for sure imagine, but it's already used kind of in a therapeutic session. Sorry. Yeah, the use of virtual reality or immersive soundscape. So I can see myself trying to do experiment with that. Of course, there is a functionality there which is very specific. So it's less about art; it's more about function. Very, but I can see, I can imagining myself using my specificity and my capacity in composing and sound designing for this scope. Yeah.
I think it's really important that if you're curating events, that you take them to different spaces and different places. So obviously with a place like this, IMAL has an audience. So what we discovered at Greenwich is that we have a concert series and we have it in different places. And those venues have an audience already. And that means we're bringing our music to different audiences. So for example, we had in September, we had a concert at Crystal Palace Park, which has a fabulous stage in the park. And we set up a 3D speaker array where we made a 1-hour composition that was made from recordings of the park. But because it was free, but because we had it there, our audience was massive because people were just going for a walk. There was an audience already there. We didn't even have to try very hard. And they came over and we said, hey, do you want to come in and have a listen? You can stay as long as you want, bring your kids. And that was such an eye-opener for us because we engaged, we brought that whole soundscape composition idea and just listening, relaxing. People just lay down on the ground, and the stage, if you look it up, it's Crystal Palace Park. I think Bob Marley performed there years ago. And it's like a rusty open laptop. It's exactly like that. And it's made of some sort of metal. So it's already a reverberant space. So when you put sound in it, it projects it. It was just really fantastic. So people could feel the sound. And that's what we're discovering, is that as we move around to the different places, we're talking to different people. They're like, what soundscape composition? Oh, wow. Or you're composing with field recordings. That's so cool. And with the eco loudspeaker, which Giulia was talking about, that projects a sphere of sound, but it's one speaker with 20 faces, 20 speakers on it. So the portability of the technology, that means that we don't have to bring like 40 loudspeakers into a space. We could bring this one loudspeaker, which Giulia brought into the crypt, which is a basement in Greenwich University, and it's the original basement of Henry VIII's palace. So the rest of the palace is gone now, but this crypt was part of the palace. And nobody can go in there. It's closed to the public, and because we had this concert there, all of a sudden we gave people access to this building, and it's a sound and heritage project. So you're getting people who are interested in history, lots of different. Your research and your projects become really interdisciplinary. So your audience is really different. And then you have these different conversations with everybody, which then feeds back into your research because you're thinking of things that you hadn't thought of. So yeah, just this speaker is cool because we can just, it's all about space and heritage. And yeah, it would be amazing in there actually. Yeah, in that room with the.
Can you bring it over next time?
I'll bring it on the Eurostar. Yeah.
Yeah, just a short word about how soundscapes are already used in a variety of therapeutical settings, including in surgery, for instance, where there was a pioneer at the Université de Liège, Fémonville, who was using the sounds of the surgery with awake patients, basically undergoing complicated operations like mastectomies and thyroidectomies, etc., without any anesthesia, just using the sounds of instruments, but building a completely different narrative with it. So instead of hearing a drill, you hear the sound of the ocean. And so there's a narrative that makes people reinterpret everything that's going on. And of course, one can see how such soundscapes may help support these sorts of interventions. And then, of course, you mentioned some people who are suffering from disorders of consciousness. One of these disorders is the locked-in syndrome, where you're basically completely paralyzed. This is the story of the French journalist Bobby, I forget his first name, who wrote a book about it, Le Scaphandre et le Papillon. There was also a movie. And so you're entirely paralyzed, but for one eyelid, basically. And so this is often misdiagnosed as patients being in a vegetative state where the brain is close to coma. There's no conscious experience anymore. But for those locked-in patients, they're exactly like you and me. They have their full consciousness, their full intellectual life. It's just that they can't move. And so and they can almost not communicate. Bobby dictated his entire book with his one eyelid to an assistant. One can see the potential of these soundscapes and immersive technologies to give those people again a sense of presence to the world, basically, that they completely lack because they cannot move.
Thank you, wonderful. This evening it's a lot about memories, about imagination. The audience, any questions you would have to our speakers? Yes, please. We have,
I can talk loudly.
we talk to try that.
Yeah. So maybe it's more of a neuroscience question. Yes, so it might be a bit more of a neuroscience question. That's something that we use, I'm sure, that whenever we compose, actually. I'm wondering if there are known, let's say, cross-sensorial modulation between audition and vision, in the same way that you showed this illusion where we felt the sound changing because the image was changing.
Yes.
I was wondering if there were, known modulation between the two that might, I don't know, bring ideas or explain why sometimes sound are so evocative.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm not really specialized in audition or auditory neuroscience, but I'm sure there must be. There are many other demonstrations, like the McGurk illusion, where indeed, which incidentally also shows how vision is important when you understand speech, basically, because without the visual input, your perception is completely different. And if there is visual input and it's incongruent, you perceive the sound completely differently. So I'm sure there's many, many demonstrations of these effects. So if you write me, I can probably direct you to a colleague who has knowledge of this literature a little bit more than I do. But of course, this is all about multi-sensory integration, as it's called. It's not just audition and vision, it's also the other sensory modalities. And there's quite a bit of work on something called synesthesia, where hearing a sound evokes a color, for instance, seeing a color evokes a sound, even there's sound taste interactions. So some people, when they chew a piece of steak, have a particular sound coming to mind. So there's lots and lots of interactions between the different sensory modalities.
Any other question?
Maybe in relation to that, I just felt it with the composition of the cosmic dust, the kind of ASMR experience, where there's a little tinkle in the back of the head. My psychiatrist told me that there's no nerves in the brain, but somehow I feel something. How is that possible?
Well, he's right in saying that there are no nerves in the brain, in the sense I could open up your skull and cut through your brain, and you wouldn't feel the cutting, basically, because there's no sensory, there's no sensors in the brain. Of course, there's lots of neural fibers, and that's what the brain is about, but there's no sensors. So I think the sensation you're feeling is at the back of your head, not the back of your brain, right? So you must sense something at the back of your brain that for some reason you locate a little bit inside your skull as opposed to outside of your skull, as it is.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of tactile illusions of the same kind that we can sort of produce with participants. So I can misplace tactile sensations, for instance, on the skin. You think I'm touching you here, and in fact I'm touching you there, but you somehow misplace it. So these sorts of effects are also going on.
But there's an auditory trigger.
Yes.
So the auditory trigger is not only me, it's like a common thing of ASMR experience. Like
Yes.
So how does this jump from the ear into the back of my head, not the brain?
Well, it's a bit like synesthesia. For you, there are associations between certain sounds and tactile sensations. How these associations have been built, I think, is still a topic of research for the neuroscientists. We don't really know, but it has to have an associative basis. perhaps also that there are specificities in certain people's brains that make them more likely to experience the sorts of ASMR-like sensations you experience, or synesthesia-like sensations. So there's quite a bit of research trying to figure out, well, is there something that went in on a different course over development, for instance, that made it so that the senses are less separated, because they are less separated in children, right? This is something that your brain learns about. It learns to assign specific areas of your brain. This is largely pre-wired, but not entirely. But it assigns specific regions of your brain for vision, for touch, for smells, for auditory processing. And in some cases, maybe those areas can be a little bit less disconnected than they usually are.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have another question? Like a final one? Okay, that's your final one. Then I have another.
Sorry, I forgot the first speaker's name, but thank you for...
Brona, hello. Hey.
Hi, thanks for the tips for the cheap software.
Yeah.
Do you also have tips for cheap speaker setups? Or like, because it's nice the software, but I still need like 8 speakers. But it's like Ambisonics, you cannot just take some speakers and whip them together because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because I need like 8 the same monitors.
Yeah.
Do you have tips?
Well, the first tip is you could buy a good pair of headphones, because with Ambisonics you can decode to binaural. So I do a lot of mixing at home on my headphones, just because you're getting that 360 space on your headphones, just in a smaller sphere. So you could start there, and then, yeah, I appreciate that not everybody has access to those facilities, but at least you can mix. You can also decode to stereo. There are plugins for that as well. It's not amazing, but it is something that you could work with. So if you just had 2 speakers and a good pair of headphones, you could start there and then build up your system. Yeah, or if you're interested, maybe find somewhere that you could do a residency. You know, yeah. But you can do a lot at home. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I didn't know about the binaural.
Yeah, okay, yeah, some people don't, so yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. I think once in a while we might have the IQ speaker and IMAL.
Yeah.
I would have a final question. This evening we talked a lot about human perception, human consciousness. We had also a quick talk before. There's now a lot of discussion about non-human life forms, that the world, the existences are interconnected. How do you approach this, that there might be other non-human life forms having some sort of consciousness, having some sort of auditive perception and spatial orientation? Who starts first?
Well, I mean, that is one of the big questions. Who is conscious? And the answer is, we don't know. We know that, I know that I'm conscious. I think you're conscious, you know, the robot, you know, but I'm using, actually, I don't know, for the reason that Nagel pointed out. I cannot put myself in your shoes. So that's the general point. And of course, it gets worse with organisms with whom it's impossible to communicate. So beyond humans, we cannot use language. Even with babies, and we cannot use language. So we have to make inferences about who is conscious. And the difficulty with that is that we at this point, we don't have any biomarker or even tests for consciousness. This is, we wrote a fairly big paper last year about how to think about tests of consciousness. And there's no agreement. These tests have to work with all sorts of organisms. But how do you test an earthworm? You know, there's nothing that we can use that we know about that, you know, you take it apart. Can we pinpoint, oh, the consciousness module is there? That it doesn't work that way. So nobody has a good answer to that. And again, from the theoretical perspective, you have the whole spectrum, right? Some people think electrons are conscious. Some people think just humans are conscious.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the last project that I was talking about for 90 speakers and conductive bones headphones. And in that case, I'm trying also to imagine how it will be if we will transform in water animals, basically. So how our perception will change. So how we will be able to listen to the world in a different way. But this is pure fiction, but it's an interesting, very interesting exercise, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I don't have a question, but I'd like to make a comment, an appreciative comment. An appreciative comment, because you've been talking about space a lot, sonic space, light space, all sorts of space, mental space, imagination, and there's a physical space that we're in, and this physical space creates sonic spaces, light, clouds, light, and shadow, and space. So and the mental space. So there's no barrier between all these spaces, and there are many others. And it's interesting that you all talked about it. I mean, I'm an architect. It took me an hour, basically, because it opens beyond the fourth, fifth dimension, whatever. That's what you talked about for me. And I was trying to see, for instance, creating a sound space. What does it look like? Yeah, and because you're talking about visuals and or in the virtual reality, where is the space in it? And where does it start? Where does it stop? Or does it stop? Or does it start?
Can I say one?
Yeah, thank you.
Can I respond?
Of course, because I was
Sorry.
actually, no, that's perfectly fine, because I wanted to actually ask you, Simon, if you have a question, so you have a deal, please, if you could.
Just because you're an architect, this week I was working on a project with an acoustic architect in London, and we have a concert next week on Wednesday at the Garrison Church in Woolwich in London, which was bombed during World War II, and all that exists of it is the altar, and there's a canopy, and it's just a garden now where the park, where the building was. So what we did in February is we discovered that there was another church in Wilton near Stonehenge that was built by the same architect, slightly different, like pretty much the same church, but a few, maybe, I think it's a bit wider. And we did impulse responses there, which is what Giulia was doing with the balloon, where you're trying to capture the acoustics of the space. And then you can use something like convolution reverb, where you put the file into a plugin, and then you can put your sounds all through this reverb that you've created, that's come from this space. So we're going to try and recreate the church, which now doesn't exist, just has the altar through sound. So we have a loudspeaker array, and we have the impulse responses from the other church. And we're going to compose some, we've also recorded in the other church. So we have these beautiful sounds of footsteps, of doors closing, all with the reverb and acoustics of this massive church. And we're going to play them in the church that is no longer there, but in the garden with an array of loudspeakers in surround sound to try and recreate this church that was...
So you would recreate the sound of the other church?
Yeah, we're going to try and put people back in the space when it was there. So it's quite interesting. I don't know, maybe you'd be interested in.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we could go on for a longer time, but typically laser talks have 90 minutes, like a short format. Thank you so much to our speakers. I think we learned a lot. We had a wonderful sound, visual experience, a very warm and human one. Thank you very much also to IMAL, Lucia, Dani at Machines. And there will be more laser talks this year. I think there's a website, they connect for laser talk in Brussels. There's always interesting crossings. And of course, we would wish that your dialogue continues after this laser talk. I think you have made some nice discoveries, so maybe that's a starting point of future collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you.